60 Minutes Rewind.
It was 12 years ago we first saw this picture. Secret Service agent Clint Hill climbing in the back of the presidential limousine that dreadful November day in Dallas to try to push Jacqueline Kennedy back to protect her life. Clint Hill was a Secret Service agent for 17 years. He was chief of the White House detail, later assistant director of the service. The agents one meets on duty are almost faceless, humorless, single-minded in their devotion to their chore, and Clint Hill was no different on duty. But Clint retired from the Secret Service 4 months ago at the age of 43. In the first public statement he has made, sitting with his wife Gwen, he told us some startling things about the Secret Service.
A lot of the agents are getting tired. In 1968, when the service was required to begin protecting candidates on June 6th.
After Bob Kennedy was killed?
Yes. After that, it became apparent that the agents were really suffering from extreme fatigue. They were working 12 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. They were gone from home for weeks, months at a time. And then Director Rowley testified to that up in Congress and testified that doctors who had examined many of these agents were suffering the same type of fatigue that many military men suffer in battle.
Victims of battle fatigue or not, the Secret Service still must run down and check out each and every potential assassin. Clint, you people at the Secret Service keep a list of potentially dangerous people, right? Something in the order of 35, 40, 45,000 names.
Right.
And we hear that that list is constantly updated.
Every day.
But Sarah Moore wasn't on that list. Lynette Fromm wasn't on that list.
Okay.
Wait a second. Arthur Bremer wasn't on that list. James Earl Ray wasn't there. Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't on that list. Sirhan Sirhan wasn't on that list.
Is Mike Wallace on it?
Well, I have no present intention.
No, but tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock, do I know for a fact that Mike Wallace is not becoming a psychiatric problem? You know, if I could predict every person who would stand in a crowd with a gun in their hand, I'd be the greatest thing since Gene Dixon. You just can't do that.
Let's say that somebody is on the list. None of these people were on the list. Let's say that Oswald, Moore, Fromm were on the list.
Yes.
Well, then what do you do about it? Let's say that they show up in the crowd.
You keep them under surveillance.
Just keep looking at them.
Keep an agent with them.
For any hand motion or
Any unusual movement whatsoever.
How did they miss Sarah Jane Moore?
Well, she just never came to their attention. As far as I know.
You say as far as you know, but San Francisco Police Inspector Jack O'Shea says that he warned the FBI and the Secret Service that Sarah Jane Moore might be another Squeaky Fromm. Nonetheless, there she was, front line across the street from the president.
According to the agents, as I understood their testimony, that's not what they claim was said to them. And I believe the agents.
Then we brought up the question of whether the Secret Service has the final say when it comes to protecting the president. Did you ever get into a fight with the president's chief of staff about something that you recommended? Chief of staff said, no, that's not the way it's going to be.
Yes.
Who?
Bob Haldeman.
About what?
The building of a presidential car.
The building of the car?
We wanted a certain type top on the car that would protect the president from the rear. And he said no.
If you'd had protection in Dallas from the rear, Jack Kennedy would still be alive.
Yes, he would. That's why we wanted it.
Can I take you back to November 22nd in 1963? You were on the fender of the Secret Service car, right behind President Kennedy's car. At the first shot, you ran forward and jumped on the back of the president's car in less than 2 seconds, pulling Mrs. Kennedy down into her seat, protecting her. Well, first of all, she was out on the trunk of that car.
She was out of the back seat of that car. Not out of the trunk of that car.
Well, she had climbed out of the back and she was on the way back, right?
And because of the fact that her husband's, part of her husband's head had been shot off and gone off to the street.
She wasn't trying to climb out of the car, she was...
No. She was simply trying to reach that head, part of the head.
To bring it back.
That's the only thing.
In the 12 years since that assassination, undoubtedly you have thought and thought and thought again about it. And studied it. Do you have any reason to believe that there was more than one gun, more than one assassin? Was Lee Harvey Oswald alone, or were there others with him?
There were only 3 shots. And it was 1 gun, 3 shots.
You're satisfied Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone?
Completely.
Was there anything that the Secret Service or that Clint Hill could have done to keep that from happening?
Clint Hill, yes.
Clint Hill, yes? What do you mean?
If he had reacted about 0.5 of a second faster, or maybe a second faster, I wouldn't be here today.
You mean you would have gotten there and you would have taken the shot?
The 3rd shot, yes, sir.
And that would have been all right with you?
That would have been fine with me.
But you couldn't. You got there in less than 2 seconds, Clint. You couldn't have gotten there. You surely don't have any sense of guilt about that.
Yes, I certainly do. I have a great deal of guilt about that. Had I turned in a different direction, I'd have made it. It's my fault.
Oh. No one has ever suggested that for an instant. All that you did was show great bravery and great presence of mind. What was on the citation that was given you for your work on November 22nd, 1963? Extraordinary courage and heroic effort in the face of maximum danger.
Mike, I don't care about that. If I had reacted just a little bit quicker, and I could have, I guess. And I'll live with that to my grave.
You can understand it took Clint Hill some moments to compose himself after talking so openly of his memories of that day in Dallas.
Is that what's responsible for your early retirement from the service?
Yes, sir, it is.
You really are a victim, in a sense, of combat fatigue.
Well, that's not exactly what the doctors call it.
What do they call it?
I have a severe neurological problem caused by what has happened in the past, and they've recommended psychiatric help.
Traceable to what has taken place in your life, Gwen's life, and the lives of the people that you were guarding.
They trace it all back to 1963.
Well, then we turn to other subjects. We asked this former chief of the White House Secret Service detail whether there was ever a time when any of the 5 presidents he served expressed deep concern for his own personal safety.
Yes, there was.
When was that?
In 1968.
68. What happened?
Martin Luther King was killed.
Yeah.
And President Johnson was scheduled to go to a memorial service for him. And he called me 2 or 3 times. Once, I recall, it was at 2 in the morning, and I think any other time was at 4 in the morning. Is that right there?
The president called you at home?
Yes.
And
Requested that I be as close to him as possible the next day, preferably not a foot and a half away from him.
because he feared that...
He had the feeling, a premonition that something was going to happen to him.
Then we turn to Lyndon Johnson's successor, Richard Nixon. Clint, there's been a lot of talk about San Clemente and Key Biscayne. Estimate how much work was done on the Key Biscayne and San Clemente homes of Richard Nixon in the name of security and in the name of the Secret Service that was actually unnecessary from the Secret Service point of view. $1 million worth?
Oh, more than that. But the total expenditures, and I don't recall what they are, I would say that more than half of them were not required by the Secret Service.
By whom?
Well, by the General Services Administration.
Well, the General Services Administration doesn't just go out there and say, let's put in a bed of flowers here or a stand of trees here. Somebody has to say, do it.
Well, I think maybe you better present that question to Bob Haldeman.
What you're saying is that Haldeman ordered, or somebody in the White House staff said, do it, and tagged the Secret Service with it.
Absolutely.
Last year, the cost of guarding Mamie Eisenhower by the Secret Service came to $472,000. I imagine the same thing was true for Bess Truman and for Lady Bird Johnson, right?
Yes.
Do they need Secret Service protection?
In my opinion, no.
Why do they get Secret Service protection?
Because it's a law.
Simple as that. What does a Secret Service agent do for Mamie Eisenhower or Bess Truman or Lady Bird? Take her to the beauty parlor?
Yes, it's mainly a service function as opposed to a protective function because the threats aren't there.
In a sense, you are butlers, chauffeurs, companions.
Very good friend of mine who was formerly the Secretary of the Treasury. He said exactly what you just said now, Mike. That's what you've become. Butlers, chauffeurs. And I told him, I said, Mr. Secretary, and I'm not going to say who it is.
I know who it is.
We all know who it is.
Yeah,
John Connolly.
It's John Connolly, right.
Said,
Enough of that. That's what he said.
enough of that.
And I said, I agree with you.
The story will continue after this.
Hill also told us there's too much time and money wasted protecting foreign dignitaries visiting this country. Half of them, he thinks, don't need that protection.
It ran down to finance minister, the divorced wife of a king, the deposed monarch of a certain state, without using any name.
Yeah.
And it really got to be pretty damn ridiculous, to be very frank and honest with you, and extremely costly.
Money aside, could you give the president, the sitting president, and his family, and the official Washington, better protection? When I say you, I mean the Secret Service. If you didn't have some of these additional chores that you don't believe merit Secret Service.
There's no question about that, Mike. You know, if you don't have agents sitting places where you don't really need them, and you can really utilize them in other situations, you're going to have a better protective effort.
It's a political year, this one coming up. Obviously, the President of the United States is going to get it. What about candidates? Who knows, there may be a dozen Democratic candidates and at least one additional and maybe more Republican candidates in addition to the President. Should they all get it?
No, they should not. In 1972, it became absolutely ridiculous. Secret Service was required to protect people like Dr. Spock, Tom Anderson from Tennessee, who was the vice president on the, I can't recall the name of the ticket, but it was one of them with a former congressman from California,
Schmitz?
Congressman Schmitz. We were asked to protect Julius Hobson, who is from Washington, who was the vice presidential candidate on a ticket, who was a terminal cancer patient, and who the agents went over and talked to, and he signed a letter of declination, who was the only person that I know of that did. But it gets completely out of control.
How, in the final analysis, can the Secret Service protect against somebody who is mentally deranged and suicidal if he or she wants to kill the President of the United States? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's possible, but if you place the president in a glass cage down on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but it's not practical, you can't do it.
You mean it's just a chance that we're going to have to take, and it is possible for somebody who is mentally, or a fanatic, who is willing to sacrifice himself or herself. There's nothing that the Secret Service in the final analysis can do.
You're absolutely correct. It can happen any day, unfortunately.